We know that the economics around post-combustion carbon capture are very challenging.
It's a very interesting problem. It's like a chicken or the egg. I mean, there are some situations where you might have a storage site ready to go, but the transportation infrastructure is not ready to go.
It creates a very different environment for us to kind of go to people and be like, how do you want to buy these tons per year, right, of carbon?
There isn't a magic money tree, right? We'll give these projects a good initial capital injection, but actually now they need to liberalize.
Welcome back to the Interchange Recharged podcast. I'm Sylvia Leyva Martinez, Research Director at Wood Mackenzie and host of the show. We're wrapping our coverage of the Houston CCUS event with a fast tour of the whole value chain. There was so much interesting content, we decided to do a special episode to tie it all together. And we had great interviews we had to show, even when it's been a week after the conference. We'll be jumping straight into the Emitter seat, then the LNG economics, and finally UK transport and storage. What clears, what doesn't, and what's next. First up, the Emitter perspective. Cement is around 8% of global CO2 emissions, and these process emissions don't vanish with efficiency tweaks. Here's James Lopez, CO2 subsurface storage advisor at CEMEX, on subsurface uncertainty, permitting timelines, and why you can't greenlight capture without storage certainty. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So tell me a bit more about, well, I think many people in your audience know about CEMEX, but tell me a bit more about the company anyways and your role there.
Yeah, so CEMEX is just a global leader in providing cement to the world. You know, it's building materials. Cement is an important part of infrastructure. It's an important part of our life. We can't get away from it, right? It's everywhere we go. My role with CEMEX is as a CO2 subsurface storage advisor. So CEMEX has an initiative to decarbonize its industry. So right now, cement actually supplies about 8% of greenhouse gas emissions globally. There's a lot of different initiatives, regulatory push, as well as corporate responsibility to decarbonize our industry. And one of the ways to do that is to capture it and then try to find safe places to store it underground. And so my role with CEMEX is trying to help that happen.
So cement is one of the industries that has been found the most difficult to decarbonize, among others, steel and such. Could you tell me a bit more about the role that CCUS is playing in decarbonizing this particular industry and what CEMEX is doing about it?
The process of producing cement releases CO2 into the atmosphere. It's an inherent part of our process, right? You heat limestone, releases CO2, and then we produce clinker through that process. There's other elements, combustion, the heating element for limestone that'll also produce CO2. But for us, it's process based. You can't get rid of it. There are methods to reduce the amount of clinker needed for concrete, but not enough. We're still gonna produce CO2. It's just inherent to our process. I mean, there's other methods you could capture it. So we have to capture the CO2. Either you can utilize it for some things, but it's still not enough. So we're still left with a lot of CO2, and you could either release it back out to the atmosphere, or we find ways to store it. And that's where the CCUS plays a role in helping us decarbonize the industry.
Is CCUS the only method of reducing the amount of CO2 that is released onto the atmosphere? Or is there a way to, change the material, any other change within the process to achieve that same goal?
So yes, there are other methods, other ways to reduce the CO2. We can be more efficient with our process. That's one way to do it. But at the end of the day, we still produce a pretty significant amount of CO2, and it's just part of the process.
You were just in a panel about the emitter perspective on CCUS. In the show, we have already discussed with financiers, with developers, more people on the technology side. So I'm wondering, what are some of the key takeaways that you, from the emitter perspective, shared in this session?
What I really wanted to share with the group is that the uncertainties, there's just a lot of uncertainty in the subsurface, right? The geologic processes that you see today that shape our planet that we live on are the same geologic processes we've seen that shape the subsurface, the deposit of the sands. And it can vary quite a significant amount, right? Even within 10, 50 feet, 100 feet, 1,000 feet, you're going to see different depositional changes, different characteristics underground. That uncertainty is really means that there's some inherent risks with developing a site. So a cement plant can't just, or so let's say Cemex, for example, can't just make the decision to invest in a capture facility. It's going to be quite expensive without having a subsurface spot characterized sufficiently, So let's say it's in the pre-permitting phase where you're collecting data. We can't exactly make a business decision to capture without, unless the site is permitted or there's some certainty around the EPA granting, for example, here in the United States.
Yeah.
It's the same thing overseas. We have offshore storage sites that are in different various stages of development. Some are still in the exploration phase. They have exploration permit. But then after they're done with their exploration, then they have to apply for an injection permit, right? So, I mean, it's a hard call to say, okay, let's work with this company who's doing the exploration when, what we really need for industry is a safe spot to store CO2.
Yeah. So it seems like there are challenges across the different steps of the project development process. So it's on the very early phase, so to say, identifying or finding where you're going to store the CO2. That's the first part. And then checking the actual feasibility for that particular solution or that particular asset and doing all the tests, obtaining the permits, making sure that you can actually inject CO2. But you're already investing money in these types of assets and trying to get those permits before you can actually store it. So how do you find that balance between early investment and practically betting on a new project versus managing all these uncertainty that you're talking about?
So there are different incentives, right? In the EU, they're mandating that a certain amount of storage is available for emitters. So there's some push for development that way. But you're absolutely right. It's like a chicken or the egg thing. So what's going to happen, right? I mean, there are some situations where you might have a storage site ready to go, but the transportation infrastructure is not ready to go. It's a very interesting problem and one that's very dynamic. I don't think there's one mindset that you can take into looking at these type of projects. You kind of have to be flexible and creative with how you look at these projects.
Finding partners for each of the steps within the value chain and making sure they are all working together, because ultimately together you're developing a single project and the business decision is going to involve all the steps of the value chain.
Oh yeah, it's very hard to, unless you're a big oil gas company, you're not going to be able to develop the entire value chain yourself, right? So it's very important for companies like ours to find the right partners, to move projects forward.
For companies like Cemex, what is the driver on having these types of initiatives? Because something that we have been discussing in the podcast from the pure energy perspective is the shift in the narrative from let's focus on decarbonization and more on the energy independence, energy dominance side. But I think from the client side or the emitter side, it's a very different perspective. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
There's a regulatory, like I mentioned earlier, push here. So let's take California, for example. They have a goal to be net negative or net neutral. I think it's by 2045, 2046. It might change a little bit in the future because it's kind of hard to reach.
Seems like a moving target, right?
Well, I mean, it's good to have a line in the sand, right? But, to get things moving. The problem is in California, for example, yes, okay, we want companies to decarbonize. They don't have the regulations in place to actually facilitate that transition quickly. For example, they have a moratorium on pipelines. I mean, you can't build a pipeline. So unless you own the property around where you want to sequester your CO2, you can't build a pipeline to put it underground. It's a tricky thing. So you have regulatory pushes, but then we also have incentives, right? We have the 45Q. Seems to be here. It's not going to go anywhere, right? So at least that's our hope and our plan for the future. Regulatory push, financial tax incentives also help going forward. And then our commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing our carbon footprint.
Is there an interest from your customers on low carbon cement? Is that a thing, or is it something that still needs to further evolve?
That's an interesting question. And we actually talked about a lot of that today and yesterday in the conference. That market's growing, and the demand will grow. So that's kind of the hope.
What do you most need from the CCUS value chain? You talked about challenges across the entirety of the different steps. So capture, transport, storage, what would help you the most?
Costs are an important factor. They really are. And the favorable regulatory environments.
Yes.
That really dictates where we can focus our efforts on. right?
Okay.
So if you look at the global playing field, you're going to see most of the projects happening in the US and the EU. Why? The Innovation Fund and 45Q. There's the financial incentive to help push adopters across the finish line. So that's super important. So that helps us kind of pick regions globally, right, where we're going to want to focus our efforts.
Yeah.
But then, and let's take the United States, focusing in there, we need local state regulations that are going to be favorable for us to push forward. I mentioned California having the moratorium pipeline, making it difficult for projects to move forward, right? Especially if you're far away from the storage sites that are being planned right now. And you have states like Texas, right, who might get state primary hopefully this year, which would help push the permitting process forward a little bit. So maybe get some Class 6 permits past that finish line faster. So that would help. That would be good for us to start if we want to start looking at project planning, right? Infrastructure is a big thing too. So where are the best pipelines at for CO2? Wyoming or up that way, up northern America. A lot of different things. Cost would be important, but that's only going to come down once these sites start being developed, right?
Yeah.
Also infrastructure. I mentioned pipelines is going to be very important. So where are the pipelines at, and will that be? And then of course we need regulations that allow infrastructure and storage sites to be developed.
And it seems like each of these elements are applicable to all steps of the value chain, right? So it's not only capture or transport, it's all across the board.
Oh yeah, you can't just focus on one. You do not. CCUS doesn't work if you only have C or the capture. So you need all links working together to make a project move forward. If there's a broken chain, then you don't have a project.
And just to wrap up, Cemex and your team are developing projects all across the globe and different types of carbon solutions. So what are you the most excited about in terms of the work that you're doing?
So right now, a big topic is saline aquifers. That's what everybody's looking at. But there are other options out there. So we might not have a cement plant that is in a position to take advantage of a saline aquifer. It might just might not be there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but there are other options out there for storage as well. Mineralization is getting a lot of traction. There's a lot of development that way. There's some unique problems with or challenges with mineralization that's different from saline aquifer, but it's still a developing technology and will become a viable storage method where it's available. You need special subsurface conditions, special rocks, mafic rocks, ultramafic rocks for this to happen. And then there's also storage within unminable coal seams. And so coal seams is another option that's being actively looked at in the United States that could potentially play a significant role for CO2 storage. And having options is great because some areas might not have a saline aquifer, but you might be favorable for mineralization, right? Or you might have huge swaths of unminable coal seams around that may be beneficial for you. And each one of those have their unique risks associated with them. So understanding them all. I'm just excited to see all these different technologies play together and the role earth science is kind of mixed into this whole transition that we're going through.
Awesome. Well, James, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Okay, let's layer in the power and fuels angle. LNG demand is long-term, but buyers want lower carbon intensity and they want it now. One developer is designing that in from day one and making the numbers work with 45Q tax credits plus the sale of environmental attributes. Coastal Bend LNG CFO, Glenn Wilson, explains how they're capturing pretreatment and post-combustion CO2, targeting step change capture costs, and monetizing verified carbon attributes alongside LNG offtake. Glenn, welcome to the Interchange Recharged podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Tell me a bit more about Coastal Bend LNG, the company itself, what you do there.
Sure, for sure. So Coastal Bend LNG, look, we're a privately held LNG developer developing a multi-train facility then along the Texas Gulf Coast.
Okay.
And one thing about our project is we're inherently making it a low-carbon design. So we in LNG projects, you've got 2 points of carbon emissions. One comes from the pre-treatment of the gas. The other one is kind of from your energy source, right, for powering the liquefaction, often cogeneration. So we're including carbon capture on both, on the pre-treatment as well as on the post-combustion. So the total emissions profile for our facility basically goes to zero, right? And so the reason we're doing this is because it enables us to kind of market our fuel with a lower carbon intensity, and just looking ahead to where LNG markets are going to be going, it kind of positions us for kind of the future, right, of what the market is going to be demanding, right? So that's kind of the root basis for the project design. And then obviously the point being, with respect to being on the Texas Gulf Coast, we've got easy access to feed gas, access to deep water ports. Yeah, all the logistics of making an LNG operation are there, right? So
it seems like by design, you already have a low carbon solution, and you're thinking about what the demand is going to be in the future for those types of products. There's already demand now, but how it's going to be evolving over the next few years.
yeah, absolutely. So if you think of it from the perspective of, again, there's end markets. It's not about the market you produce the LNG, and it's about the market which wants to buy the LNG, right? And so when you start thinking of European markets, the EU, for example, it's methane regulations.
Yeah.
You think of Japan and Korea, who, have their own kind of climate objectives, right? Those things haven't changed, right? These markets and the regulatory regimes are still kind of directing towards kind of a low carbon, net zero, whatever you want to call it, a low carbon future.
Yeah.
And so they're still in the process of wanting to buy long-term LNG offtake agreements. So at what point I'm selling you LNG, you're wanting to have that for 20 plus years, we have to kind of make sure that LNG is going to have a low carbon intensity. As you start introducing regulations around those, like I said, with the European Union's methane regulation, we know that there's a framework in place coming in for that, for understanding your carbon intensity across your supply chain, and it's going to be introduced by 2030. No one quite knows what it looks like in 2030. So you've got to be ready for it. So that's kind of why we're designing the project the way we are.
Okay, awesome. So in your role as CFO, how do you balance the commerciality of LNG with what you just mentioned on the sustainability side, the decarbonization side, and the appetite of the market? Because it seems that there is this balance between this not short-term view, but the immediate view on the design versus how you think the market is going to evolve and the appetite for low carbon products.
For sure. So I kind of joke to my CEO that I'm kind of the accidental CFO, right? Because my background is actually, I'm a physicist by trade.
Me too.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Okay, great. I love it. So I come at this from a very technical background. So my background historically has been in technology development, leading that into commercialization, go to market, and the like, right? So that's kind of how I'm coming even at this from a CFO point of view, right? And so not a traditional CFO, right? So when I think of it, it's all about new market creation, right? How are you taking a new fuel to the market and differentiating with respect to other fuels in the market? And look, but in traditional CFO hat on, right? My job is to make as much money for the company as possible, right? And so we need the technology solutions which enable that to happen.
Okay.
It's not about saying, all right, well, I'm just going to put carbon capture on the back end of my cogen. It's great. And the next thing you know, my economics get sunk, right? So we know that the economics around post-combustion carbon capture are very challenging. We know, basically everyone, today here at the Wood Mackenzie CCUS event, people have been speaking about that, right? There's high costs. We need that step change in capture costs to be able to make the whole CCS economic, right? Yeah. So we're going into this with very much a technology view, right? What are the technology changes required to actually get us from $90+ per ton cost of capture down to something closer to 50, right? And so it's a fun role of both being CFO and then placing those cost requirements on the technology solutions that we require. And because our objective is to be able to roll up the entire cost of capture and transport and storage. We're going to contract out the transport and storage. So
Okay.
I know fixed fee done by somebody else. Great, that's over there. We get to control the cost of capture. And so our objective is to make all of this fit within the 45Q tax credit framework we have here in the US. And that underwrites our investment. And then what we want to then do is, with respect to those end markets who are buying the LNG, we want to be able to monetize out the environmental attributes.
Okay.
Right.
So
Now-
it's like it's a twofold
It's a twofer.
revenue.
It's
revenue
a twofer,
source.
right? Absolutely. So we get to be able to, the 45Q provides the underwriting.
Yep.
Right. And obviously, as a new project, I don't require tax credits, right? They're no use to me. I've got enough depreciation. So the fact that we have the transferability mechanisms mean I can monetize those out. And then, like I said, but it gives me all the flexibility on the environmental attribute. And particularly what's really important from a financial point of view is that I don't need to have a floor price.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Because
Interesting.
that's the key aspect. Otherwise, if I'm having to go to somebody, my environmental attribute with my LNG is X dollars, and I'm going to sell it to you, but it can't go below that. That's the problem, right? But if I'm effectively going to market saying I don't have a floor because it's underwritten by 45Q, it just gives me all that flexibility when you start thinking, what are the economics in the carbon markets?
And helps with the competitiveness overall of the product that you're offering.
Absolutely. And so what all of that carbon does is effectively, on our LNG price, it effectively increases it, right? And the other aspect that goes with this as well is, so on the LNG business, it's really margin expansion. The CCUS is effectively giving us margin expansion on our economics. So that's what it does. But the other really cool thing about it is carbon is fungible. So if I'm selling the LNG to somebody and they, for some reason, don't want to buy the environmental attributes that go with it, that is a ton of carbon was prevented from being released to the atmosphere, then we can sell that carbon to somebody else.
Yes.
And we will find the market which is going to be willing to pay the most for it. So we can actually split that up. And so that no floor price I was referring to, actually, now I'm shopping around at who's going to pay the most for it. Right. And I'm not going to call it free money. That's the wrong way of describing it. But because we have the 45Q underwriting it, all that carbon price goes towards margin expansion on the LNG business.
Perfect. So it seems like there is a lot of flexibility in the current structure, and you have like the advantages. It seems like you have like the best of both worlds, because you have the fiscal incentives from 45Q, but also the ability to sell the environmental attributes to somebody else. So you effectively have access to a completely different market.
Absolutely. And so if you think of it, and the carbon, because the way it's fungible, you can sell it, you can package it in different ways.
Yeah.
Right. The fact that we're building it, we're including it on our cogeneration, I could package it as an environmental attribute certificate for power markets. I could sell it to somebody who just wants to reduce their scope 1, scope 2 emissions. I can attach it to the LNG for penalty avoidance in end markets. So we have all these ways that we can monetize it out.
Yeah.
And the real fun part is actually now is finding out who wants to pay the most for it, right? What are those markets? Because they're all new and they're all emerging, right? And so that's really fun. LNG is known. We know who wants to buy it. There's people who want to buy it. We know the markets. Like that's mature, right? But the carbon markets are yet to really evolve, because particularly this kind of real, I call it industrial decarbonisation, right? Where you have your carbon credits are backed by MRV plans, where there's going to be known liquidity in those markets, right? We're delivering X million tons per year into the market. It creates a very different environment for us to kind of go to people and be like, how do you want to buy these tons per year, right, of carbon?
A lot of flexibility there, like a lot of opportunity, definitely, but also I think there is also complexity in having so many options.
Oh yeah, no, there is, and you got to simplify it down. You got to start there, simplify. But
Yeah.
the key thing is I come back to that whole point. From my background, it's all about new market creation, right? These markets are they're dark markets today, right? They're not an open market where you know the spot price and you know what something is worth, right? Carbon right now today is just inherently in a dark market. And we got to see the maturity of that go across to an effectively open market, right? And so that's just going to be that's the really exciting, fun journey here, right?
Very interesting times indeed. You were just on stage with Elena Belletti, the head of carbon research here at Wood Mac. Can you tell me a bit more about what you discussed with her?
Yeah, for sure. So it was great being up here and being able to present and tell a bit of our story, right? There's obviously a lot to our story, and we can only 20 minutes only lets you tell a certain amount. So we actually spoke a lot, introduced Coastal Bend, obviously, but then we kind of really followed on from some of the morning sessions. So in the morning, Peter Finley was talking a bit about the different technologies, capture technologies, their costs. And so Elena and I kind of really dug into what we're doing differently.
Okay.
And so, yeah, again, we realized there is a high cost of capture technology today. we have partnered with a company that's spun out of MIT called Solvanic. And so they're doing a closed loop amine system, which the industry is familiar with. The difference being is that their regeneration of the amines is electrochemical, not thermal. And so from a systems point of view, it's actually a lot simpler. And so Elena and I kind of talked around that and why that was significant, to the point, getting that cost down so everything fits within 45Q.
Yes.
That's the incentive. That is the driver. We also touched on what we're doing with respect to the end markets we're talking about, right? And so we're tokenizing out the carbon intensity of our LNG. And so what that means is we're having to go back into our natural gas supply chain from well all the way to water. We're obviously the facility along there, but then being able to do MRV across that entire process to say the carbon intensity of that ton of LNG is this many tons of carbon, right? So when we start thinking in the future, when regulations come in these end markets and there's going to be penalties applied to your carbon intensity, we now have an authentication system where it's like this cargo of LNG has all of these tokens of LNG, which describes their carbon intensity, and it's all documented. The data is there. It's auditable. It's verifiable. But also the benefit of tokenizing, as is now being picked up by the financial industry, is that it's immutable, right? You can't change it once it's done. It avoids double dipping, right? How do I know I've sold it to this person and that person? You've got provenance, right? And so that's kind of a really important thing for us. And we see that as, again, positioning for where these end markets are going to be, where they're going to be thinking of what they require as documentation to prove to me what your carbon intensity is of your LNG.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we have seen in the renewable generation side with the RECs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how are you?
So I'm trying to avoid saying REC. So I'm trying, because I'd say it's like a REC, but environmental attribute certificate. But same thing. It's the same idea. Think of if I know there are some folks who have tokenized RECs, but that same idea, right? Where it's like the provenance is really clear.
Okay, okay, interesting. So it's good. It's interesting for me to see something that we have discussed on the show is how within the CCUS space, there are a lot of similarities with solar when it first started. Like the challenges are very, very similar. In the end, they're both large infrastructure projects, right?
Well, actually, the funny thing is the way that it's really funny you mention that. So in our project, we actually look more like in the project financing for our LNG project, because we're storing. Our capture plans are about 1 million tons a year per train of LNG, right? At 45Q price, that's about $1 billion worth of tax credits.
Okay.
Right? And so that enables us to view our structured financing more like a wind and solar project.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because you have this mixture of LNG, right? What you're doing, you've got these tax credits, and then you've got this third bucket of these environmental attributes, right? And so it just gives a lot more it makes our LNG project look a lot more like a classic renewable or renewables project than a traditional LNG project.
Yep.
And so again, yes, the flexibility you then have in your financing structures, you can be a lot more creative.
Yes. Yes, and it's something that we have definitely seen. Do we sell bundled or unbundled RECs? How is the PPA price going to look like? So yeah, effectively.
Exactly. And can I forward sell these things?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And if I can get a safe harbor on my tax credits, can I forward sell the entire thing, take a loan against it?
What is the recapture risk in the case of sequestration? What's going to happen if there are leakages?
And what's that offtake agreement between ourselves who are claiming the credit and our transport and storage guys, so I can do I pass off that risk to them? How is that what's that contractual relationship between the parties? How does that influence the claiming of a credit? This is where it gets lots of fun.
Glenn, this has been really interesting and I've learned a lot. So thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to see what Coastal Bend will develop in the near future.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on your show. And I look forward to being able to come back and talk to you more about it.
We'll close where so many projects succeed or stall: transport and storage. In the UK, depleted gas fields and repurposed infrastructure could bend costs down, only if bankability and offtake line up. Nick Terrell, Executive Director at Carbon Catalyst, shares insights from the UK's first offshore CO2 injection test and how cross-border policy could open cheaper storage to EU emitters. Nick, welcome to the Interchange Recharged podcast. I'm so happy that you're here.
No, great to be here. Great to be in Houston.
So, just for our listeners to know more about Carbon Catalyst, tell us more about the company and what you do there.
Sure, yeah. So we're a carbon transport and storage development company focused in the UK. So we have a couple of projects centered on storage in the North Sea, the Poseidon and the Orion project. And we've been developing these over the last couple of years, 3 years or so, moving to FID on Poseidon in 2027.
Oh, nice.
Yes, and we've got some great partners. So we have our main operator is Perenco, which is a big Anglo-French company, one of the biggest gas producers in the North Sea. And they operate a lot of the gas production infrastructure, the terminals, the fields, etc. And so it was great to get them involved. And then we have Harbour Energy, one of the big oil and gas producers in the North Sea, and also the Japanese trading house, Sumitomo. So a good solid partnership to be developing projects.
I was going to say, it seems like a wide variety of partners, different geographies that you're interacting with, even though the projects are right now only in the UK, right?
Yes, I mean, we're dealing mostly with the local UK teams, but of course these companies have global portfolios, capabilities, knowledge. So it's great to see that being brought to bear to the projects as well, yeah.
Could you tell me a bit more about those two projects that you mentioned? I know that Carbon Catalyst has been working on storing CO2 in aquifers and depleted wells. So tell me more about it.
Our two projects, Poseidon and Orion, they're both centered on storing CO2 in depleted gas fields. So these are very large legacy gas fields that, you know, were kind of delivering a lot of the UK gas demand in the kind of 80s and 90s and have been now gradually declining. And so what we're doing is we're going in and repurposing these assets and turning them into CO2 storage sites. So our main project, Poseidon, it's the Le Mans gas field that we're redeveloping. And the Le Mans gas field is the UK's largest legacy gas field. So at its peak in the 1990s, it was delivering around about 40% of the UK gas demand. So a real world-class gas field. And now we're hoping to turn it into a world-class carbon storage site. Earlier this year, we did the UK's first offshore CO2 injection test. So we brought CO2, 4,000 tons of liquid phase CO2 out to the storage site by a wellhead platform. And then we injected that over a 2.5 month window and injected in gas phase, in supercritical phase, but also liquid phase CO2. And we're able to achieve some great injection rates of well over 1 million ton per annum. We could probably have gone to 2 probably, but we were constrained because of regulatory requirements. So we proved the injectability of the reservoir, and we also proved that we could repurpose existing gas production infrastructure like wells and platforms, repurpose it and reuse it for the CO2 injection and storage, which is great.
I was actually going to ask, like, what does it mean to pass that test? Like, it's proving the injectability, so effectively showing that you can use those depleted fields to store CO2, which is the main hypothesis of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's a feasibility. Yeah, it's a test.
Okay.
One of the challenges we have in the industry is that we lack empirical data, field data, right? Because no one's really doing a lot of this stuff yet, right? We have a few early projects which are helpful, you know, in the kind of context of Europe, you know, Sleipner in Norway and Snøhvit, you know, they've been going for a while, but we need more data, and so that's why we went out there and we got the data basically.
Okay.
So otherwise, you're kind of reliant on models, you know, and models are, you know, inherently wrong. You'll appreciate this from your day job, right? We now have data that we can populate the models. We also wanted to really just to demonstrate that, you know, it's actually relatively straightforward. You know, we don't need to heat the CO2. We just really need to pump the CO2 in liquid phase down the well, and we demonstrated that the reservoir could take it, could accept it. Yeah,
that's awesome. And could you tell us from these tests, or in general the projects that you're developing, what are the lessons learned in terms of finding an asset or developing an asset that is bankable and safe, and I think also quick, that can be developed quickly?
Yeah, no, sure. So we're not bankable yet, right? So we're taking FID in 2027. to get to that point, we have to conclude our appraisal work. So the injectivity or the injection test was a key step there, but we have additional site characterization, a lot of engineering work. We're now heading towards FEED on the project, which is great. And then we're looking to be able to be in a position to submit a storage permit probably sometime next year, which would then pave the way for FID
Awesome.
in 2027. But of course, it's all about carbon offtake, right? So we've been working hard for a while now to secure the anchor emitters for the project.
Okay.
And so these are UK-based emitters. We're transporting the CO2 initially via vessel, by ship. And because we're repurposing the infrastructure, we can drive our capex down very, very significantly. And so we can then go to the market or go to these customers and offer them a highly competitive transport and storage fee, which is essentially the kind of the revenue model there. And we can do that because our costs are extremely low because we're repurposing gas infrastructure, essentially.
So it's leveraging existing infrastructure that is driving down costs.
Yeah.
So that makes it a more competitive offer to your clients.
Correct. And then how it feeds into bankability, of course, is that whilst we as transport and storage side of the equation, we can get our costs down, the emitter, the customer still needs to capture the CO2. Capture costs are a big element of the full chain CCUS equation. And of course, if we're going in very low cost on the TNS side, we can really, really help. And
TNS is transport and storage, right?
Transport and storage, correct. So on the capture side, they have to pay less transport and storage fees. The gap between the cost of the capture plant, policies like the ETS, etc., the ETS savings reduce significantly. And it allows essentially a lot of these projects to start with very limited external support and subsidy on the emitter side. So we can get the whole process going on a much smaller scale, essentially.
How is it finding emitters? Like you're in that process of developing these partnerships. So you mentioned they're all based in the UK, right? But is there the possibility to increase the partnerships across the EU?
Yeah, we have a huge portfolio of prospective customers and agreements with them to move forward, which is great. A lot of emitters in the UK, so energy from waste plants is a big one because they can finance some of their project through CDR revenues, etc. But we also have abated gas, so existing gas-fired power plants, CCGTs, of course. There's also refineries, cement, petrochemicals, chemicals. So there's a very large portfolio of emitters that are committed to decarbonize and are moving towards that kind of bankability point. And then our store is in the very south of the North Sea and is actually one of the closest storage sites for a lot of emitters, or the closest storage site, in fact, for a lot of the emitters in continental Europe. So in Belgium, France, northern France, places like Dunkirk, ultimately Germany and the Rhine Valley, they need to find a storage solution for their CO2, and we happen to be the closest storage site because these guys unfortunately do not have access to adjacent storage. Yeah.
And what role does policy play in all these conversations across countries? Because on one side, we have challenges with permitting, and it's something that we have heard throughout the conference, particularly in the US, but also like how is policy helping or hindering in international cooperation for CCUS project development?
Yeah, so at the moment, we are unable to move CO2 across international boundaries. There's the policy in question is the London Protocol. The boundaries are opening up now, so we're getting policy focusing on cross-border CO2.
Yep.
And earlier this year in the UK, the EU Commission, the head of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, she met with Sir Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister in the UK, and they agreed a reset at a reset summit, basically. They're looking to link the emission trading scheme across the UK and into the EU. There's alignment plans on the CBAM and ultimately opening up the borders to flow of CO2. What's great there is that then UK storage can provide services to a lot of the European Union emitters that do not have access to local CO2. So that's great. And the overall kind of cost implication is that we can deliver lower cost storage for them, and that drives down the whole overall full chain cost and ultimately cost of decarbonisation.
Perfect. So we go back to the competitiveness conversation and how effectively policy would allow more players to have access to lower cost CO2 storage.
Yeah, I mean, policymakers are hearing, the market, and the market saying, if you want us to decarbonize, we need a cost-effective solution. And so opening these borders will certainly drive down the transport and storage element of those costs.
So it seems on the policy side, things are changing to the better. But what are the bottlenecks that you're seeing in CCUS project development?
Yeah, so in terms of bottlenecks, I mean, it's really about projects taking FID. And to take FID, they need to be bankable. And at the moment, we have in the UK 2 projects that have reached financial close, which is great. These are big projects. They're heavily government-supported finance projects as well. But there's a need to do more projects like ours, for instance. But government needs to step out. It wants to step out. And also we need inflows of more kind of private capital coming into the sector so that we can scale. And so what we're starting to see is an evolution of the business model in the UK from a heavily regulated model where government provides revenue support and cross-chain guarantees and things like that, to allow projects to be bankable, to move forward, for them to start to move out, and for projects like ours to move forward with much less support. As we do that, as we get more projects reaching FID, we'll get more data on performance and operability. The finance sector will get more comfortable about investing in CCUS. We'll start to get more commercial insurance products coming in, and ultimately we can move to a place where the whole system is fully liberalized and we don't need that government intervention. And when we don't have government intervention, we can move much faster, we can deploy much faster, and we can scale the sector.
And just thinking about how the environment is very different between the UK and the US. Over the past couple of days, we have been discussing the challenges all across the globe for CCUS, but in the US in particular, there is this dependency of projects on 45Q incentives for them to be bankable. So can you tell me a bit more about how you're seeing these differences between policy between the US and the UK?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I've been having a lot of conversations over the last 2 days with US and Canadian friends and colleagues. The dynamic is actually quite similar in many ways, in that, with the new administration, there's been a pullback in terms of DOE funding. Of course, you've got the fiscal levers, which is great. I think we'd love to have those kind of fiscal levers in the UK and in Europe. Whereas in Europe, there's been a lot of state support, intervention, subsidy, direct subsidy, indirect subsidy. But there's also a realization that there isn't a magic money tree, right? And that actually, we'll give these projects a good initial capital injection, but actually now they need to liberalize.
Okay.
And so we're certainly seeing this in the UK, which is, the UK has committed £22 billion. That's almost $30 billion for the first 2 projects. But actually to move forward, there's going to be much less money available. And that's why the system needs to liberalize. And I think there's a lot of conversations going on over here about a broad range of projects that are moving forward. But there's a recognition, though, that that these projects need to make commercial sense. They need to make economic sense to move forward, and that they need to be commercially sustainable. Essentially, yeah.
So from what we've seen within Carbon Catalyst, from your conversations in the conference, what would be the main thing that would need to change in order to have more CCUS projects on the ground? Like, is it on you already mentioned the role of policy. We have been talking a bit about technology. I don't know, from your perspective, what needs to happen to see more CCUS?
Yeah, I mean, we need more FIDs, of course. That's easy to say. There's a lot of good projects out there now. So it's about delivery.
Yeah.
But it's delivering in a commercial manner, a commercial approach, right? Which is absolutely critical. I think we've got to recognize that, there's a lot of headwinds for the sector. And the big challenge is really around costs, right? We're doing our bit, I think, in the UK, and particularly in our project, Poseidon, with driving down the transport and storage side of the costs. But we need to get the capture costs down. And to do that, we need more projects. We need to prove the technology. I've just already been hearing about a couple of new great companies that have got some great potential solutions. They're still very low on the TRL side of things, but they have great potential. But we've got to just get these technologies through so that we can move away from the more expensive capture technologies, get the capture costs down, and then demonstrate that actually we can deliver cost-effective decarbonisation for a range of industries and ultimately for society.
I love this. So from the carbon catalyst perspective, it seems that you have brought already the transport and storage costs down. Then the missing link would be making the capture part more efficient. So overall, as a CCUS project can be more competitive and effectively, we can see it at the speed and scale that we need right now.
Yeah, it's about driving down the full chain CCUS costs. I think our lower cost solution can enable more projects to take FID.
Definitely.
They can deploy their capture projects. We can learn from those. The technologies can evolve, and we can move down that cost abatement curve. And I think we've also got to recognize that we are moving forward on projects. There are large multi-megaton projects moving forward. There's projects popping up constantly. And actually, these projects that are moving through that FID milestone into the construction phase and into the operational phase, all that data is going to be hugely powerful to help us drive down that cost equation. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Nick, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great being here.
And that's our CCUS wrap. I was thrilled to see the shift from cautious planning to confident execution. We learned how real projects are moving towards FID with actual data and how economics are finally starting to work. The biggest takeaway for me was that success comes from three main factors: cost certainty to attract capital, subsurface confidence to lower technical risk, and policy coordination to improve deployment timelines. I'm certain there will be more ways to integrate CCUS in broader decarbonization ecosystems, like pairing it with hydrogen, renewables, and utilization in ways that make the whole system both sustainable and profitable. If you missed the rest of the mini-series, there are 2 other episodes you can queue up right now: our policy and finance conversation and our technology and project delivery episode from the Houston floor. You can find them on our podcast feed. If you like the show, leave a quick rating or review and follow Interchange Recharged wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Sylvia Leyva Martinez. Thank you for listening and see you soon. Nos vemos pronto.